Good morning. Uh, as Dale just said, it's been several months ago that he called and asked if I would be able to come out here today and talk the report that I did last February on the changing structure that I've seen in the grow yard space, and I very quickly accepted and always look forward to the opportunity to participate at K-State. When you release those papers, the first thing I've learned over time is I spend a lot more time pre-thinking of who I'm going to piss off this time. I've learned that lesson. But the other thing that I've learned from that, and Wes can testify to this, I've never released one yet where I didn't get questions or perceptions that were totally different than what I was thinking when I wrote the piece. And this one's no exception. How I got into this deal, and I'm going to try to go through this pretty readily, because if dinner last night was any indication, I'm expecting quite a few questions, and Glenn's already had a lot of them. But with my job, I haven't been in every feed yard in the country, but I've been in the majority of feed yards in the country. So I get to make a lot of observations. And the bank was in a position that our share of commercial feed yard lending was at a level that it was becoming increasingly difficult to find new accounts or qualified accounts. And we were also, the bank was at a point where the regulators were looking at the per share of our portfolio that was specific to commercial cattle feeding, and were suggesting that we spread out that risk. So as a result of that, the bank started calling on more and more grow yards. And I was being called into those conversations, and the real question that we were getting from clients initially was, how on earth do I handle the risk, and what do I do with feeder cattle basis? Are the question invariably I would get every time. So that was kind of the process behind the scenes that got me to take a closer look at this topic. When I talked about the misunderstanding, the unintended consequences of releasing these things, I think the problem in explaining this report, when I came out and started talking about a new paradigm for grow yards, or a new environment for grow yards, and the pushback I would get from people that just looked at the title was, Don, grow yards have been around since Moby Dick was a minnow. What's new? I don't disagree with that. But what's new is how we're using those facilities and the enhanced relationships that we're seeing form between feed yards and grow yards to escalate efficiency in the industry. The conventional grow yard has said they've been around forever. But really, they didn't serve as anything more than residual housing for cattle. That in a perfect environment, conventional grazing is more economical, still going to be true. So really, we used grow yards when we had poor grazing conditions, feed yards got backed up on cattle, or calves got just ridiculously undervalued. And so the capacity utilization of those facilities was sporadic at best. And what we're seeing with these enhanced relationships is it's not just using that facility when economic opportunity slaps them in the face, but it is having cattle in those facilities on a continuous basis. So, say the utilization of that investment goes into a regular rotation instead of just a hit and miss deal. The other thing I think I would argue for a conventional view of a grow yard is that sector of the industry has traditionally been undercapitalized. And as we've restructured them, we have cattle in there full time. There's profit coming, consistent profit coming out of that facility. It has greatly enhanced the capitalization that makes that a much more stable business. All right, so what are the drivers? The growth potential in the cattle. When Glenn made reference a little bit ago that we're selling fed cattle average weight of 1,400 pounds. The genetic potential that is in cattle today has essentially allowed the industry to eliminate one full step in the production process. That we used to wean the calves, go to wheat pasture or grass program, and then go to the grow yard and then the feed yard. We can go straight through with eliminating one of those steps. A mega driver in this whole deal with why feed yards are looking for this opportunity, the labor availability in all, it doesn't matter in my travels if I'm talking with any of the major packers or if I'm at a feed yard, labor is the number one issue that comes up. The other is that as yards have gotten bigger, not only in capacity by unit, but most of these commercial entities are now multi-location ownership. They just don't have the ability to micromanage stressed or high-risk cattle like we could have years ago. Handling lightweight, the feed yard, because of efficiencies and because of the labor, they want a steer, let's just talk realistically, an 8 to 950 weight steer. We can pull that down to 750, but they want a steer to show up that is of that weight, that he's healthy and hungry and shows up wanting to eat. With the formula grid marketing agreements that are in place, they have to be able to deliver X loads of cattle per week, and they do not have the versatility to belay or string cattle along until they meet their expectations. Then the efficiencies, economy of scale. The benefits for the feed yard, it allows them to have a central collection point for cattle that they can put various sets of cattle together. It gives them a place to condition those calves, make sure the health is good before they introduce them into a broad population of cattle. Enables those cattle to grow structurally on a lower cost ration than in a commercial feed yard. The other, if you take the buying staff for a commercial feeder, if you have that staff only buying 7 to 9 weight steers, but they're still making just as many calls to clients, they're making hitting just as many sale barns as they have done, if they are able to expand the weight classes of cattle they're buying, it makes them much more efficient. And it enables them to buy cattle that in every sale barn every day, there's some weight of cattle that are undervalued. And to have that versatility to expand the buy for whereas the value is way more efficient than just buying, I got to buy this weight of cattle because it's what my system calls for. The other point is if they have an inventory of weight classes of cattle, it takes a lot of pressure off of that buying staff if they know they've got a third of their inventory on hand, a fourth, whatever. But you take in mind, a lot of these large commercial entities are having to buy between 15 and 30,000 feeder cattle a week. And you think about that, that's not a big trick if you miss 1 week, But if you miss 2 weeks or more, and now you have to be buying multiples of that base number, you very quickly drive the market in just getting your inventory caught up. So it enables them to have a lot of leeway built into the system. The other is that it provides the opportunity to sort the non-performing cattle out earlier. I can tell you from my own experiences, how do you know which 10% to sort is still a question. But if you buy a 50,000 pound load of 450 to 5 weight calves, and then you're having to haul out a 50,000 pound load of 8 weight steers, it forces you on a single load case, it forces you to take 10% of those cattle off. And I'd say 8 of that 10%, or 7 to 8% of that 10%, we know which ones to sort off. It's that 2 to 4%, I don't know. But it certainly cleans up, eliminates that problem, and gives us a higher level of assurance of performance once those cattle reach the feed yard. All right, we've talked through a bunch of these. It enables that commercial to expand his hedge window. If he's not buying those cattle until they're that 8 to 9 weight, he's got 175 days time window before he delivers. If he's buying lighter weight cattle, it enables them to greatly expand both the time window for risk management, but enables them to really do a better job. It also, I'm not going to come to with the premise that backgrounding cattle is cheaper than natural forage. I'm going to tell you it's not. But the trade-off that is gained is having absolute knowledge of where the cattle are, having increased expectations or increased assurances of what the performance of the cattle are, in most cases offsets the additional cost of having them in confinement. And in doing so, it better enables that commercial to book cattle forward, to know he has cattle ready to meet his hook commitments for when those cattle are finished. It just tightens up the system. All right. When I talked with grow yards and backgrounders, and I use that term interchangeably, and I probably shouldn't be as loose with that as I am, but because I think there's a lot of advantages in what was the pure definition of a backgrounded calf is opposed to a grow yard calf, but it's still very, very close. But as I talk with the grow yard managers, they say their sweet spot is to have relationships with 2 to 4 different feeding companies. And that enables them, A, to shop their bid, but 2, it enables them to have different types or different quality of cattle that fit a specific feeder's needs or profile. So it gives them some versatility. So when I go in there and start talking about we need to tighten this relationship and have that that relationship as an ongoing basis, they gave me a fair amount of pushback. And here's what they tell me. They say, look, we can go down the road of having an exclusive relationship with XYZ feeders. We get along great for 3 to 4 turns of cattle, but on that 4th or 5th turn, either they're not aggressive in the market, we have a set of cattle we need more money out of, but that pricing relationship, they'll have a dust up. It won't blow up, but they'll have a dust up. So I think that's an area that this whole premise the industry really needs to focus on. The drive to increase efficiencies improves economy of scale both for the grow yard and for the feeder. it allows the efficiency of using the same nutritionist and the same veterinarians. So in most cases, what I'm talking about, if you get to a finishing ration at the grow yard, that's essentially the starter ration at the feed yard. So those cattle are trained for confinement. They're fully adapted to the ration. It's not all that 30-day, 2-week to 30-day disruption that we have first placing outside cattle in a feed yard. We're trying to make that transition as seamless as possible. And that enables that animal, steer, heifer, but when they land in the feed yard, they're ready to start performance from day one, and you don't have 2 weeks of a month getting them ready to go on feed. So, say the fair compensation, that needs to be addressed. My observation on this deal is that, well, I'm talking very broad brush here, but I don't think the commercial feeders have given full credibility to the cost of running those cattle in a grow yard. And I think that as they're becoming more dependent on having those preconditioned cattle, they're having to be more receptive of what the actual cost is. That's especially true when you factor in whose responsibility is the death loss, or what's the percentage distribution of responsibility for death loss. And there's going to be some more in those lighter cattle. I think an absolute clear-cut determination that needs to be made going in is who has the say on accepting high-risk or stress cattle. And we've all heard of this and seen cases where a grow yard can be absolutely on track with their performance, but if the commercial owner of those cattle is pressured in the market, he starts going down in both the quality and condition of the cattle he's buying. He in turn delivers a set of high-stress calves to the grow yard, and then expects the grow yard to absorb the death loss. That dog isn't going to hunt. You know, we've got to have that mutual understanding, and clearly there are going to be sets of cattle that have surprises. And without pointing finger at who is accountable, there will be surprises. What is that predetermined relationship to handle that situation when it comes up? All right, so the benefits industry-wide for the cow-calf guy, we see this usage of grow yards of adding more buyers to the market. For the cow-calf guy, it gives him more selling opportunity. It allows moving away from that seasonal situation when everybody in your region has cattle that are ready to go to town the same day. It allows more versatility on when to market both from the seller and the buyer. It gives them more latitude on when they want to buy. Potentially, it takes away pressure from, if we have more cattle in grow yards, we have pastures today that are dedicated to yearlings. If more of those cattle are in confinement, that would free up grass that would enable us more room to expand cow numbers. And it could potentially arguably could ease the pressure on the escalation in lease rates from what we've had traditionally. Competition for available grass, cover that one. So really what we're trying to address with this, a key driver for the commercial feeders is their constraints on labor, certainly skilled labor, that guys that feed yard help, that cowboys that know how to handle stress cattle is becoming a near impossibility to find or to keep. It enables them to work around that. the cattle are preconditioned for bunking water. Eases the risk, or should in most cases, for pin pulls in the feed yard. Helps identify the non-performing cattle and increases the chances of those cattle meeting performance expectations. Just the cut and dry of that is, if that, I'm not talking derogatorily against conventional grazing practices, but if we have an animal that is on some kind of concentrated high energy ration for a longer period of time, it increases the propensity for that animal to grade or grade better. Better daily gains and better defined out dates, and the ease of pressure on procurement teams. All right, so the next handful of slides I've added to this in preparation for today's meeting, but I think we can talk the practicality of applications and why theoretically this thing is beneficial. But the next handful of slides I'm going to use is I'm going to show you the condition of today's market that is the driver to support this whole concept. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room, over the improvement in cattle quality over the last 15 to 20 years has been unprecedented. And you can see out there that where we've been over the last 6 months, it's sag. But if you take the level of stress that the cattle that have been on feed for the last 6 months endured, both for snow and cold this winter, and then from the amount of rain, mud, and muck they've dealt with, that by itself has been the detriment to grading rates. The other piece I would put in there is, while it didn't last very long, we had this little blip in corn prices this spring, and as corn price goes up, the incentive to shorten up days on feed goes down and is detrimental to grade. I think this trend line will continue. I think the cattle are better, and I think they're continuing to get better. But as that performance quality has increased, the assurance of that quality eating experience every time has increased. Glenn talked quite a bit about how strong demand has been, and I could not agree with him more. And I agree wholeheartedly with his statement that domestic demand and export demand are two entirely separate entities, and we have to measure them independently. But that improvement in quality is what has enabled the industry to see that resurgence in demand. We can't back off this. We cannot back off of this one. We've got to make them better. All right, so this is the pulled directly from the weekly comprehensive cutout report, and this is the premium that branded cutout has over the comprehensive. And if branded, that's equivalent of the upper 2/3 of choice. So we're talking CAB products, certified Hereford products, virtually all of the branded products will fall in this category. And you can see that there's a tremendous amount of seasonality in that. We see the biggest drive in that premium as we get into the spring, as we get to the end of the yearling cattle and get the first of calf slaughter into the mix. But that also falls against our heaviest grilling season of the time of the year. So we have that big push in that March through up to the 4th of July, and then we'll see it at sag in the middle of the summer. Largely, that second setback in there is usually as we get into the dog days of summer. Everybody's had their appetite with the desire for grilling and the heat impact on appetites and all that stuff. And then we rally back into the fourth quarter as we see that big push on middle meats for corporate holiday buying for the holiday season. But that $4 to $8 a hundred is essential. That premium is what is forcing these commercials to strive for increased quality. There's enough of you in this room that feed cattle and know or aware of closeouts, but against the base price that we record every week, virtually every phone call I have with somebody talking about grid performance, they will tell me that their cattle will bring something between $4 and $6 a hundred premiums over what the established price was. That's critical. All right, this one I find incredibly interesting. The red line is the premium of prime graded beef over the comprehensive cutout, and that spread is currently about $65. That's at nosebleed levels. We've never seen anything like it. And you can go back and look at that thing for some detail, and it was a premium of $8 to $10, but it was pretty flat through the first quarter of this year. But as that grading, that balance of premium product to the total volume of product is such a delicate balance that as soon as we saw that dip in grading percentage that we talked about a couple of slides back, that spread has exploded. And when you talk about a premium of $65 a hundred, and we're talking cattle that 8 to 10% of our slaughter week in, week out is now prime. And it's not at all unheard of on some of these high-end quality cattle to see the percentage of prime in a lot of cattle between 20 and 40%. That is huge profit to the feed yard. It's huge profit to the feeder, it is huge profits to the packer, it is huge profits to the HRI, hotel, restaurant, or retailer where that product ends up. Before I go completely away from this, clearly I think you'll see the black line's the 5-year, the green line is 17, that blue line is 18. So while I'm talking about how wonderful this is, keep in mind, in 17, demand was good. Demand was growing, but we were producing enough of that product with the full grading rate. We had a cap on that spread, but as soon as we saw that disruption is when it took off. This will be a driver for, now that we're here, that's going to be a driver for a long time. There's the flip side of the coin. If you take a commodity set of cattle, if the average grading rate today of choice and better is between 78 and 80%, where just 15 years ago the average grade was roughly 50-50, with the discount that you have on non-performing or commodity cattle, that spread is going to be the driver that we are finally going to see the price spreads in feeder cattle quality variation that we have talked about for 20 years. Yeah, how do you do that? I don't know. But I think those spreads that I've just showed you, it's going to force that commercial feeder to buy more and more reputation cattle. It's going to enable or force him to buy more source verified cattle. And if that's the best tool we have to identify those cattle, so be it. But here's the flip backside of that deal. It is going to force a bigger and bigger discount on the put together and just commodity cattle. So as you think about that for a little bit, think about the cattle you're sourcing. Think about their origin. I'm not telling you that there's going to be guys in this room who are value feeders, and you could see that commodity calf, that put together calf, trade at such a discount. They might be a hell of a value. But keep in mind, it's that drive for those identified sources of quality cattle that's going to drive that spread. So on that discount, erosion and select cutout, I'm not so sure that it is a lack of, I'm not so sure it's oversupply of select product. I think it is from a contraction in the available demand or usage for select product. And where I think there's a sector of the market, whether you're talking frozen and prepared foods, institutional prepared foods, hospitals, I think there's a demand for select product going forward. But as you're all aware, Walmart has gone to was essentially the last holdout of selling a case of select-based product. And over the last couple of years, Walmart has very aggressively been transitioning to a choice-based product. That's where that demand for, that was the big supply, demand source for that product. It's only the Southeast region, but you've all read the stories about Walmart's relationship with Creekstone and 44 Farms and how they're going to go with their own labeled product. As that becomes more ingrained into that Walmart system and expands to other regions, it will have an additional big impact on that discount to select product. All right, I've got a couple slides left, and I don't know that these really fit the theme of the conversation I've had today, but I think they're critically important. That black line across there is annual per capita consumption of all protein. And look at that thing. It's flat. Now, we had a little bit of sag in here when cattle supplies were so short there from 2008 and the real shortage of cattle in 11, 12, and 13. It sagged a little bit. And in conjunction with that cattle supply, you had the real ramifications of high-priced corn prices as we were forced to implement the ethanol policy that drove corn prices higher. The up and down bars in this thing are total production by species, and the growth that we have seen. The green is the growth in poultry. The red one's beef, and the blue bars are increases in pork production. You can see that run up that we have had. So we exist in a very mature industry. But you can see that all of this expansion that we've seen that really started about the mid-'80s and where it's at today, the fact that we're in a mature industry by species, we are not going to be able to grow our industry if we are solely dependent on domestic usage. The per capita consumption, in my view, hasn't really changed. The only increase in domestic demand that we're seeing is we're stealing a little bit of demand from each other between the species, but the real growth domestically is simply from population growth. It's not from increased consumption. But we have had phenomenal growth of all species in the last 20, 25 years. This is the annual exports by species. And, you know, we export Between 18 and 20% of domestic broiler production is exported. We export between 22 and 25% of our pork production, and beef exports have been capped in a range of 12 to 15%. And the reason that I give that range of 12 to 15%, if you run that calculation on a carcass weight basis, we're exporting about 12% of production. If you add in variety meats and offal, it will bump it up to that 15% level. But here's the point I'm trying to make. We look at that level of exports or share of production being exported. Our real opportunity for escalation in exports lies in the beef space. Now, Glenn brought up the ASF thing and the quantity of pork that the U.S. is exporting to China. And if you listen to the news on a daily basis, you hear about the tit for tat on tariffs. You talk about China's announcement that they were not going to import any more U.S. products, period. I will tell you, I don't have it in here, but if you look at a chart of U.S. pork exports to China in 2019, it looks like a roadmap of I-35 to Minneapolis. It's gone straight. We're sending a lot of product over there. And I agree completely with Glenn, what Glenn's saying about the potential that we have. That shortage, I'm getting kind of off subject here, but I'll rein this back in. The bank's view is that China's hog inventory is probably reduced by 50%. And we think production currently has been reduced by about 35%. We're projecting that their shortage of protein is something between 6 and 10 million metric tons. That's a larger number than global exports of protein from every available source. That's how explosive that deal is. So the other thing is they have, up to this point, between 60 and 70% of the pork going to China originated in the EU. We have fully tapped out their available supplies. The other big supplier was Brazil. We've essentially tapped out their export capabilities. The only store left in town is the U.S. I think I can take this conversation way off track. That's the real leverage the U.S. has on U.S.-China negotiations right now. But that's a big, big number going forward. Okay, here, I'm going to try to bring this back in line with what my actual topic is. North America. And if you listen, I distinctly say North America, not the United States. And the reason that I say that is because of the improvement in cattle quality, the improvement in cattle feeding and beef processing in Mexico. Mexico is going to be a major player going forward. It's for real. When I'm down there working and tour those plants, I see technology being implemented in Mexico that is advanced over what I see in the U.S. And when I talk to them about it and say, what's this about? And they say, Senor Don, it's very simple. I said, in the United States, if you have a food safety issue, the processor will have a recall, they'll get a slap on the wrist, and by Monday it's business as usual. He said, with us, it's one strike and you're out. If we have a food safety issue in Mexico, we don't get a second chance. That's why the emphasis is there for improvement in quality and the emphasis on food safety. So here's my takeaway, and try to tie this all back in. North America is the global source for quality and ultra high quality product. Brazil feeds about 7% of their cattle. And for a whole host of reasons, I don't, it's going to grow, but it's a tough deal to swing. Australia is talking about an escalation in cattle feeding, and they're going through one of the most severe droughts they've had ever. And they've got cattle on feed in Australia today is about 1.4 million head. That's a record. But the record driver in that is that the drought is so severe that it has forced a lot of natural forage cattle into the feed yard just because they don't have anywhere else to go with them. So North America, when you think about everything where I'm going to try to wrap this up, if you think about everything we've talked about today, if you talk about the economic drivers that why confined backgrounding and grow yards work, if you take consideration to the labor shortages, if you take the efficiencies in animal health and nutrition that can be gained from having consistency of the nutritionists and the veterinarians, and all of those factors contribute to U.S. beef quality and efficiency, that's why that program makes sense. Say, that last piece of that deal, I know it's kind of out of the box, and I know it's outside the range of what the core topic was, but as I worked on that stuff, I thought, you guys, the cow-calf space and the grow yard background guys, you need to have awareness of that global drivers in there right now, because that's where our opportunities are going to lie for growth and opportunities in the future, and it has to be driven off quality. With that, I will open it up for questions. Wes. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to the conventional stock? Okay. Yeah, I will. All right, Wes's question was, what are the opportunities with everything I've talked about here today, what are the opportunities for the stalker backgrounder operators, and what are the threats to conventional grazers? I think the opportunities, because of the conversion that I talked about, is taking that grow yard space from a sometimes filled unit to a full-time or majority-time filled unit and rollover of cattle every 60 to 90 days. I think there's incredible opportunity for that. And I also think there's opportunities in that, as it's in that category of things that we frequently get requests or input from clients, more so in the true corn belt or row crop areas, but the frequency that they have kids that want to come back to the farm, they're landlocked from 2,500 to X number of acres, and there's just not enough revenue stream there to add on additional households to the operation. This is in that category of things I think could enhance, create the income for that second income stream to bring kids back home. I like that component. As far as my concerns for the conventional grazer, I think the biggest thing, he's going to have more competition for buying calves. I think that's the biggest threat that I see. If there's an offset for that, it could open up enough available acres that it could ease the escalating rate on pasture lease rates. And you know, when I started working on this, and I didn't mention it earlier, but you know, I remember the old days when cattle prices would get out of whack, and I'm going to go buy. You get to grass season, and I'm going to buy a bunch of these light calves. It wasn't a big hurdle to go out and find an available ranch somewhere and lease it for the season. Those days are gone. So we have to find ways when those opportunities present themselves is to capitalize on it. The other, and I need to pursue this further, but if you look at every time we have a census of agriculture and you look at the available pasture, rangeland, and grazable forest, those acres are contracting. And they're contracting from urban sprawl, they're contracting from less use of BLM ground, they're all of the reasons why. And I worked on that number, and I tried to use a national, we have conditions in the West where it takes 110 acres per cow, and how do you factor that in? We've got situations in the Southeast where they're running a cow for every acre to acre and a half, but the closest I can come up with a national average is about 13 to 13 and a half acres per cow. And I really have concerns that the limitation that we have in growth and expansion of the industry over time is our lack of availability of suitable grazing land. And so if we can use these alternative sources to absorb those calves, it will open up ground to run cows that will enable us to increase the size of that core herd. And I know somebody's going to argue with me, yeah, Don, but there's some of this ground that's really good for yearlings, and there's some of this ground that's just really not worth a damn for cows, and I get it. I know that. But as land availability becomes restricted, we're going to have to think outside the box in terms of how are we going to utilize this thing to increase the size of our industry. All right. Yes, sir. Wow. Boy, that's a great question. All right, the question was, today, what would I say is the percentage of cattle that go through a grow yard or backgrounder before they go to the feed yard opposed to conventional? The honest answer I'm going to give to that one is I don't have a clue. This number is straight off the top of my head. It's just observational. But I would tell you that I'm going to give 60 to 65% of the cattle are from some conventional source, range source, whether that's wheat pasture, double crop, Flint Hills grass, and 30-35% confinement. It's still very, very small. The share of confinement cattle is still very, very small. For medium-sized yards like we have here in Long East, what would be your opinion of the economics of a grow-finish yard as compared to feed step? Okay. The question was, with the size of the yards in central and eastern Kansas, what's the economic feasibility or viability of doing a combination? Is that right? Okay. I'm gonna take kind of a twisted answer. I'm gonna answer your question, but I'm gonna take a twisted way to get there. From my observation of seeing these things, I think the optimal size, the ideal size for a grow yard is in that 3,000 to 5,000 head category. I think the maximum size you want with a grow yard and the ability to handle young cattle or stressed cattle, I think if you were to have one with 10,000 head, you are really, really pushing the envelope. But with 3,000 to 5,000, that really makes it a workable relationship for if you take a feed yard from 15 to 35,000 or 35 to 60, and you have, I figured 3 turns a year of backgrounded cattle at an average of 90 days a turn and 90 days in there for just rollover. You can have that relationship with a relatively small commercial feed yard and still have them needing to source other cattle from other sources. right? So, I'm taking kind of I'm trying to answer your question, but I'm taking a backdoor approach to get there. I'm advocating the separation of the two, but the size, a relatively small feed yard can still have that relationship with the grow yard. Okay. Up.
Because the yards don't want to commit to anything unless they can hedge and know that they're.
Okay.
And so it's the price discovery between the feeder and the
Okay.
backyard
Okay.
that's important.
Okay. All right. The question comment was that awareness of several 50,000 plus feed yards that have tried to have the grow yard relationship, and because of price volatility for both sides, the relationship is broken down. Does that basically capture your? I don't disagree with that. I think this. I think because of all of the reasons that we have talked about, the labor shortage issue, the drive to make the cattle better, availability of supply, I think that commercial feeders are at an educatable moment on what it takes to make these deals work. I'm not going to tell you that we can go out of here this afternoon and negotiate the perfect deal that's good forever, because I don't think we're there yet. But I think that is the goal to work towards. And I can tell you that just in the last week and a half, I have had multiple conversations from commercial feeders that have essentially acknowledged that their estimates of what cost of production is in the grow yard and the risk in the grow yard because of the death loss, that they're going to have to be more receptive when they look to negotiate those deals going forward. So I think the leverage in that negotiation right now is in favor of the grow yard. Okay? But I don't want to give a false pretense that this is la-la land. It's not. We're not there. But it's doable. Okay.
Let's give Mr. Close a round of applause.